Welcome. I'm Dave Olson, editor of the Salem News, and I am here with Ward 2 City Councilor candidate and incumbent, Estelle Rand. Welcome. To start off, why don't you just take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the community and talk about why you chose to run for re-election as Ward Councilor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm Estelle Rand, as you said, and I decided to run for re-election so that I could continue to build off of the vision of community that I have and that I've shared with everyone really for the past 13 years or so. I feel like some of the work that I've started, I'd like to continue and see through with different improvements around the city. But okay, we'll probably get more to that later, a little more about me. I'm sorry, I wanted to dive right into here's what we're going to do. I live in the Goat Hill neighborhood, which I love. It is a perfect example of how Beverly has great neighborhoods. And I live with my husband and my two teenagers, Miles and Magnolia. And a little about me, my day job. I'm a librarian aide at an elementary school in Danvers. So every week I get to be with about 300 little friends and read books and help them navigate technology and books and recess, which is probably the more challenging of the three. I'm a musician. I play the trombone, which is kind of a little known fact about me. And I love Beverly.
Great. Well, thank you. Now, Ward 2, I think, is one of the more diverse wards in the city. You have the downtown, the railroad station, Bass River, Montserrat, Dane Street, Goat Hill. I mean, it's a very. What do you think is the ward's greatest asset, and kind of what makes you what strikes you as unique about it?
So, okay, the ward's greatest asset. I believe that in talking to people who are both new to Beverly and have been here for a long time, I think other than the neighborhoods, the greatest asset of Ward 2 is the walkability. And you have places to walk to. And in Ward 2, we shine in diversity in a lot of ways, and part of that is open space. So you can not only walk to some of the best coffee shops there are around, but you can also walk to the beach. You can, you can walk to 4 different breweries. You can walk to the train. You can get to Boston, Salem, and points north. So I do think our walkability is sort of what separates Ward 2 from the other wards. You see a little bit of that in Ward 6, kind of in that village atmosphere of the farms. But otherwise, Ward 2 really has a special thing with that.
One of the other things about Ward, a little bit different, one of the other things about Ward 2 is in recent years along Rantoul Street, there's been a lot of development on Rantoul Street and a lot of very large apartment buildings going up, and part of the attraction for that is also proximity to the train station and to downtown. But it's also, some people have found it a very fast transition. What are your thoughts on the kind of development along that corridor?
Yeah, then I think that's the top of the list for a lot of people, not only in Ward 2, but across Beverly. So it feels like a fast transition, but if you look at the sort of the planning process behind that, it's been decades. That doesn't make it feel any more easy to digest. I think it's a big change, and where right now you can look on Rantoul Street and there's a whole block that's being developed right now, and you can kind of you feel the process of going from an old space to an empty space, and now you're seeing the walls of the new space going up, and they feel tight. And I think there's been a lot of good that's come out of some of these developments, and especially if you talk to the people who live there, they're enjoying downtown Beverly. I hear a lot from people about what Rantoul Street sort of was for the past 30 years. And I think there are a lot of positive changes to that effect. There are more people walking around Rantoul Street and enjoying business, open space, and each other, when things are normal. I think, did you ask what some of the challenges are, or just my take
some of the
on
challenges, and do you think, is there room for more?
I hope not. I think one of the challenges representing that area during the development is that people can be quite divided on it. So some people are okay with that change. Other people really don't like it. And so I think the challenges are traffic congestion. We're still a very car-centric community. Even though we can walk, we're still very kind of focused on where are we going to park and how are we going to get there. I think what the city can do to help with that is to put some real planning and energy towards making safer walking routes, building up infrastructure, and implementing public transportation access, like bikes and ride sharing and old-fashioned buses, even. So the challenges are that we've had a lot. This ward has had really the lion's share of the development in our city over the past decade, and there's a little bit more on the horizon. I would really like to see some of that creation of housing spread out into other wards across the city. I think there are different policies we can adopt other than tall building zoning that can add housing without big impact to other parts of the city. So I guess that's more of a kind of a solution that I'm thinking and advocating for in response to the challenge of feeling like we have a majority of the development here in Ward 2, and specifically, as you said, on Rantoul Street.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky thing to navigate. The Bass River rezoning project is on the horizon, which when I was first elected, the outgoing planning director handed me a roll of papers, and she said, "This is the Bass River project." And she had already been working on it for a decade. So to your point of things, or to your question of like kind of how things feel fast, actually the Bass River rezoning has been talked about for 20 years. It's critical though that the master plan has pointed to the Bass River as an area for kind of transformational housing and change. As the Ward 2 city councilor, that will be, and if I'm reelected, that will be really important to navigate, I think, differently than the Rantoul Street corridor has been navigated. I was at the train station this morning, and I was really, really kind of shocked by how different it feels down there still. There aren't as many people commuting, and it really brings to my mind, do we need to actually start rethinking transit-oriented development? Like, is it more like stay-at-home oriented development, work from home? Like, can we start thinking about assets and things like, can we start thinking about internet and Wi-Fi as a city utility, and how will that change our focus on development? Where if we're not funneling people kind of to the train stations, then how are we supporting people to sort of have livelihoods in different parts of the city? And I think that's kind of a pandemic.
Right.
That's a pandemic side effect that I think we were thinking about things like that before, but now it's a reality that fewer people are still going into Boston.
Right.
So the Bass River, I think, needs to be handled differently than the development on Rantoul Street has been handled.
And what about the other, the other aspect of this is the need for more affordable housing. I think not just, citywide, but also how in downtown Beverly, and how would you approach the issue, in your ward and citywide?
Yeah, so I can point to how I have approached it too, if that's helpful.
Yep.
One of the things that I advocated for successfully was to deepen our inclusionary zoning. So that's the city law that says when you build new property, 12% of it has to be affordable, and that's based on the area median income. And hopefully you can have Andrew DeFranza on here sometime, and he can teach all your viewers about that. I encourage anyone to pick his brain about these things too. But so one of the things that I did was to advocate for that, the percentage that we're requiring to be changed so that it's more deeply affordable, and there was an urgency to do that because it was before two of these new buildings were even built on Rantoul Street. So for me, I think there are many different ways to tackle affordable housing in the ward. Because we've had so much development, changing the inclusionary zoning was a really smart first step. Going forward, I think it needs to be reviewed again. Right now, we have an option to pay in lieu of creating the affordable housing. And at this point, Beverly really, it's a hot place to live, it's because of all the things that I've already said I love about it. And I think we have the leverage to use with developers to say, actually, if you want to build here, you can't pay in lieu of affordable. And maybe we'll even deepen our affordability requirements even more. On that note, Beverly does meet the state, and we're actually slightly above the state requirements for affordable housing.
10%.
Yeah.
Yep.
The thing that I worry the most about with Ward 2 and affordable housing is seeing these newer apartment buildings, especially the recent one on the waterfront, which has some nice design elements that were part of a waterfront zoning process, but they're very expensive, and there's no affordable housing in it because they opted to pay in lieu, which is that's their right. That's not, I'm not blaming, I'm just stating a fact. Yep. And so when I think about especially the Bass River going forward, it's really critical that, for me, that Bass River has an affordable element to it. I don't think it's responsible to build or allow another set of buildings and apartments to be built that are at market rate rent only.
Right.
That's, because even the reduced, the kind of like affordable housing that can go with those apartments is still, for example, on a teacher's aide salary, I could not afford them.
Right.
So it's really, I think it's probably the biggest challenge of our region right now because we're so close to Boston.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Now, staying downtown for a second, a lot of the restaurants and the shops on Rantoul and Cabot, had a really difficult time during COVID. It's been 18 months or 2 years, depending on how you feels longer.
Yeah.
And now that things are slowly reopening, there's been difficulty in finding enough help for a lot of places. What can the city council do to help those businesses rebound and kind of have a sense of hope for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can turn our minds to. And I think it's worth saying thank you right now to all of those businesses that hung in. And thank you to the ones who didn't make it, too. They were here for a long time, some of them, or just trying to get started. And that's hard. I'm a small business owner myself, so I understand the the sweat equity and the passion that goes into that. So I think one of the the most pressing matter that as a city councilor that I can guide the process for and support small businesses is through the ARPA funding that Beverly has received. So we received $12.6 million in ARPA funding, and I think an appropriate use of that is to find some way to support businesses to really kind of cultivate the heart of our commercial centers of Ward 2. It's clear, but Ward 5, North Beverly, there are other places where there are little hearts of commercial activity that we need to support. I think the ARPA funding is a great way to do that to begin with. I think the other thing that we can do that's sort of almost like an assessment of our policies to make sure that they are business friendly. Some things that come to mind are just even our way of reviewing the designs of signboards and things like that. It can be kind of cumbersome for somebody who's trying to start a small business. And so we've taken some really good steps in the city, having Denise Deschamps in the planning department is a liaison for businesses to kind of connect with policy and permitting process. But I know we can continue that work and make it even more easy for people to start businesses and maintain businesses here.
Are there, speaking of the ARPA funding, are there other buckets you think that money should go into?
Yeah, there's no shortage of buckets. there are many. I think if I really want to hone in on what we need, other than supporting our business community, and this is a really general statement, but supporting our most vulnerable citizens. And that can come across in different ways. For example, during the shutdown for the pandemic, the library had to close. And in our community, we don't have a day center for people who are homeless or not safe at home. So a lot of times people go to the library. So without the library, there was no safe space out of the elements with a restroom, internet. So I'm kind of, my mind turns to supporting the most vulnerable people in our community.
Beverly Main Street has a new executive director, Rachel Borgatti. What role do you see her and Main Street's playing in the future of the ward? And kind of past that, how do you personally develop relationships with leaders like that across the city?
Yeah, so and also an opportunity to just say thank you to Jen Wallace for her years of commitment and dedication. And I actually, before I was elected, I was involved with Main Streets back, and this sort of dates when that happened, because they used to do something called 30 in Main. I am now 44, so it was a while ago, but that was before I was elected. Main Streets had created an opportunity and seen that there were a large group of 30-year-olds that were becoming and were being community leaders. So that was my introduction to Main Streets. So unless there's a mid-40s in Maine, I'm going to need to connect with the new director, and I cannot wait to hear her ideas and just kind of her fresh take on our successes and the sort of the low-hanging fruit of what we can, our baby steps, and then the broader vision for downtown. It's going to be really crucial to go back to the ARPA funding, working with Main Streets, working with the Chamber of Commerce to sort of tap their expert brains on these, what businesses need, what downtowns need to help guide that funding. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the ways I see working with Main Streets going forward. And just generally keeping, there's always, Main Streets tends to have like an initiative that they're focusing on, like when it was the arts district, that was something that I supported and followed the policy and sort of helped create some of those committees that then did some work. So I would see my role similarly going forward.
Great. Now, the city has a lot of very strong nonprofit institutions. A lot of them are in Ward 2. You've got Montserrat, you've got the Cabot, Endicott College, and a lot of is in a different ward, but a lot of those institutions are strong, and they're also expanding. Endicott is going to have a new building, and Montserrat has kind of moved into some places around downtown. And there's always that when a nonprofit expands, it's also taking taxable property off the tax rolls. How do you, as a counselor, balance that need for strong nonprofits with also the need for tax revenue to do what you want to do?
That's a great question. So you probably know that there's the pilot payment, so a payment in lieu of taxes. So that's always a path that the city and the city council can sort of advocate for and explore and also review from time to time. I do think it's really interesting if you tune into a council meeting through BevCam during kind of leading up to the budget cycle, so May-ish, and sometimes April. You'll often see that we've invited the leaders of those nonprofits to come in and talk to the council and sort of tell us what are you doing? How are you how are you using those those spaces and contributing to the community? And it is pretty astounding that they're all astounding presentations. The one I'm thinking of at the top of my head is a presentation from Montserrat. So Montserrat will come and share a whole list of what their existence in our downtown contributes to the economy. So I think you, as a city councilor, you take the time to research and really understand that list and go out into the community and actually try and see it, right? Take the time to sit down with the leaders of those nonprofits and ask the hard questions, have those conversations, and essentially you're having that conversation on a relationship that you're building over time so that you can really get to know what does the nonprofit need to be successful, and then you can share what does the city need to be successful to keep hosting this nonprofit.
Ward 2 is has Bass River on one side. It has the coast. Global warming it's a big word, but I think it's a very local problem. What do you think the city should be doing that it's not already doing to address it?
I think we're very lucky to have plans that we've developed over the past 3 or 4 years. And some of them are regional, like the Beverly-Salem Resiliency Project was a regional approach, which I believe is a really good way forward to tackle large issues like homelessness and global warming on a regional level, because we're all in it together. But on a city level, I think now, so we have some plans. We did studies, we have plans which lay out a path forward. We're lucky to know where our most vulnerable sites are along the Bass River, also, on the waterfront, on the other side, on the cove side. So now the priority should be to start seeing that those infrastructure improvements and kind of resiliency improvements in the budget.
Great.
That's
one more
kind
question.
of the next step.
One more question, and I'll let you wrap up. What was your reaction to the racist incident at last month's Beverly School Committee meeting? Do you think there's we have a problem in Beverly with systemic racism, and how can the council or a counselor kind of address that?
Great question. Yes, the entire country has a problem with systemic racism. So I'm not sure why Beverly would be any different from that. I was completely disgusted by the blatant racism that happened at the school committee meeting. My heart was warmed to hear of the response that the community gave personally towards the person that was victimized in that meeting. And I think, so what can we do going forward is to continue supporting conversations that create safe spaces to really share what people are thinking and feeling, and it's really hard. It's really hard to do. You probably know this, but one of the first things I did when I was elected was to create a human rights committee. And at that time, it took me about a year and a half to do that. At that time, every person that I approached, because when I'm visioning something and ready to take action, I talk about it. Basically to everyone I see. At that time, the response I was getting for the act of creating a human rights committee was, we don't need one in Beverly. Why? Why would we do that? So it took about a year and a half to gain unanimous support to create a human rights committee. And we're really lucky now because they're guiding us, they're leading us, they're advocating, they're doing the hard work of making space for conversations. So going forward, I think supporting their expertise and their observations and their requests for action is
Great.
something that I could do to help.
Thank you. So to wrap up, what would you like to say to viewers at home weighing in how to vote in next month's election?
Okay, so thank you. Thanks for electing me for 4 terms. I'm hoping to get your vote for a 5th term and to continue building community that supports all generations through infrastructure improvements, through budget funding priorities, and through communication. It's been an honor to represent you and serve you for the past almost 8 years, and I hope to continue to do so. Get out and vote. That is the most important thing. You have a choice. That's when democracy works best.
Thank you. And up on the screen in a couple seconds will be a list of information about where you can vote and voting times and registration times. So, and again, the election is November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, BevCam.